Marcus Hayes, columnist for the Philadelphia Daily News, a great article. I highly recommend it to anybody out there listening. He basically gets into, in depth, Bryan Colangelo, Sixers GM, and as Marcus puts it in the article, it seems like Bryan Colangelo really had no clue what he was getting into when he came to Philadelphia. So we have Marcus on the phone right now. Marcus, how you doing today?
Good, Josh. How you feeling?
I'm doing pretty good. So I want to start off with Bryan Colangelo. The article you wrote this week, I thought some of your best work. You really dig deep into the fact that this guy, Bryan Colangelo. He came to Philadelphia from Phoenix, from Toronto, two cities that not just media-wise, not just fan base-wise, but environment-wise are two totally different situations than Philadelphia.
Yeah, the sort of the ethos, and well, certainly in Phoenix, it's it's like a little LA. You know, it's like sort of like Los Angeles. A lot of glitz, a lot of glamour, a lot of people not doing a whole lot of work but worth a whole lot of money. And Toronto is like a cleaner, probably more sane version of New York City. And at neither place is the basketball team or even sports in general the focus of the city. That's not true of Philadelphia, where, you know, for better or worse, the culture sort of starts with sports. And so the outrage is greater, the attention is greater, and the repercussions are greater. So minor things that were minor in Phoenix and Toronto, become major in Philadelphia, and that's something I don't think Bryan Colangelo understood when he got here. I think he thought it would be business as was usual in Toronto and Phoenix.
What do you think has been the greatest shortcoming of Bryan Colangelo thus far? Has it been the lack of transparency, or has it been the fact that this is a guy in Bryan Colangelo who basically just totally misunderstood what he was walking into?
Well, I think he's sort of forming a policy, you know what I mean? Sort of figuring out what his administration is and figuring out how he's going to go forward with it. And, you know, honestly, how long he wants to be here. You know, this might not be the best fit for him, you know, and his family, because Jerry, let's face it, Jerry is still an advisor with the team. Jerry Colangelo, who brought baseball and basketball to the desert and is a huge deal. Jerry Colangelo might be the most significant sports figure alive today in the United States. He's gigantic. You know, he's a giant in the business. So I think he just didn't really have a plan. That's probably the greatest shortcoming for his first year of administration. He didn't know exactly what he wanted to do. He didn't really have a policy, or he tried to institute a policy that, quite frankly, failed in Toronto. I mean, when he went to Toronto, he was hailed as the savior, made a lot of big deals, took Borgnani first. You know, to his credit, you know, acquired DeRozan, and both DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't see those acquisitions come to fruition as all-stars. But, you know, he doesn't have a bad eye for talent. I just don't know that he has a great overarching plan and philosophy, and sort of flies by sort of a corporate, you know, sort of Six Sigma ethos. And that really doesn't work when you have to be accountable. You know, the corporate philosophy is not based on accountability. It's based on results and total control. And yeah, I mean, he's part of a private business, but that private business is beholden to the public for its existence, much more so than other private businesses.
What do you think the number one thing Bryan Colangelo needs to focus on doing this Sixers offseason?
I think he needs to change his image and the image of the franchise. Both he and Hinkie have made this franchise something that is relatively untouchable. The brilliance of this season is that both Joel Embiid and Dario Saric made the franchise very touchable, very tangible. They embrace the fans better than Nerlens Noel and Jahlil Okafor managed to do, and that's their personality. Both Joel Embiid and Dario Saric understand the politics of selling a product. I'm not sure that their boss does. So I think he has to be more visible, more culpable, more transparent, and really sell himself and the organization. The only person in management since they got here, since Josh Harris bought the team, the only person in management that has sort of engendered any sort of trust is Brett Brown, the coach. And the reason he does that is because every day he talks and every day he tells the truth. It's really not a tough formula.
Also, Brett Brown constantly taking the bullets for anything that happens in the franchise, and he's shown the ability to take that. Where Bryan Colangelo, as you mentioned in the article, seems to be a bit thin-skinned when it comes to the media.
Well, when you're not accountable, when you're raised, when your dad is kind of an oligarch, when he's able to bully anybody he wants to bully and bluster through anything he wants to bluster through, and that's what you're raised with. Then you go to an Ivy League school and you go to Wall Street, and you're never really exposed to the bitter elements of the world. You believe that that's the way the world is supposed to work. We have a president in that situation right now who, when rich, good-looking, successful guys who've never really wanted for anything are held accountable, it's very difficult for them to react correctly to it. You have to go through it. These are growing pains. You can be 50 or 60 and go through growing pains. That's okay. The older you are, the more they hurt, but that's fine. If he learns from it, great. I don't think Bryan Colangelo is a bad guy or a dumb guy, but you'd have to be a bad guy and a dumb guy not to learn from what he put himself through this year, just by being, not over the top smug and over the top arrogant and detached, but just being a little bit, and he was generally pleasant. He allowed himself on a radio station and a television station to let his frustration sort of boil through and his condescension. But again, I wouldn't judge him too harshly on that, because this was a period of time in which the better players on the team were sort of dropping like flies, being hurt. And it also was a period of time where the focus was on the team, where the team was getting better and had at least one, if not two, Rookie of the Year candidates. And the attention, the glare was there, and it looked like it was all going to come crumbling down. It's difficult to describe the atmosphere around the team at that point, how much tension there was, because you were going to go from a team that was sort of on the cusp of a playoff run of all things, with a clear Rookie of the Year landslide winner, to being as bad or worse than you were the 2 years that preceded this sort of moment in time where everything seemed to be coming together. And he just sort of crumbled under that pressure. And let's understand, not only has he never been in a situation like this before, there has never been a situation like this before. So, again, maybe a lesser man would have crumbled more. Maybe he held up better than we give him credit for.
We're talking with Marcus Hayes, the Philadelphia Daily News. You can follow him on Twitter at InkStainedDretch on Twitter. Does a great job as a Philadelphia Daily News columnist. Marcus, transitioning to the other team that's been active in the news in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Eagles. Their head of everything, Howie Roseman, seems to, at least in theory so far, been very acrimonious in allowing Joe Douglas to come in and do the job he was hired to do, which is make the draft board and make personnel decisions. Does Joe Douglas being in charge of the personnel and Howie being above him and not directly involved, does that make you feel better about the Eagles in the draft in the offseason this year?
Well, I'm not sure if that perception is exactly right. My understanding, and I think Howie addressed this the other day, that Howie still has the final say and the purse strings. I think he listens to Joe and Joe's department, and maybe more so than he has in the past. He takes what they have to say, and maybe it affects his ultimate decision. And, that's the way every business works. Joe Douglas is not the general manager. So he brings the suggestions to his boss, and his boss makes decisions. Here's the thing. If Howie Roseman wasn't coming to these press conferences, Joe Douglas would be the person making the decisions. But every decision made, who they've signed, who they're going to draft, not necessarily grading the guys, but drafting the guys. That'll be Howie Roseman. And it's interesting. I mean, the perception is they've got a quote-unquote football guy in there guiding Howie. But that really doesn't matter. You can have all the advisors you want, but if the person making the final decision isn't competent in making the final decision, then I'm not so sure you've done yourself any favors. And no, to answer your question, Josh, it doesn't make me feel any better. I don't care if the Eagles draft, 7 offensive linemen this year. I don't care about the Eagles or any team. But if you're an Eagles fan, I wouldn't feel particularly heartened that Howie Roseman has Joe Douglas as an advisor, because if Joe Douglas is advising him to sign, Chris Long and Chance Warmack and Alshon Jeffrey and, Torrey Smith, none of those really move my meter when it comes to building the team long term. These are quick fixes. This is exactly the Band-Aid sort of solution that Howie Roseman said he was no longer interested in. So, and who knows? Maybe they'll work synergistically, and they'll be wonderful. It'll be a great marriage. And 10 years from now, they'll both be, executives heading to the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Looking at the Eagles draft next week, it's only 5 days away now, Marcus. Do you believe the Eagles need to look at a specific position, or do you think they need to go best player available?
Well, the draft is so rich in receivers and cornerbacks, and running backs and linebackers are so often available later in rounds with similar quality to what's available, especially in the middle of the first round, that I don't really understand why there's much discussion about them not taking a guy like John Ross, the receiver from Washington, who ran a 4.22, if I'm not mistaken, or a guy like, Gary Conley, if he lasts that long, from a cornerback from Ohio State, or Marlon Humphrey, a cornerback from Atlanta, or Alabama, I believe. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I mean, some people's mock drafts, and I don't put a whole lot of stake in mock drafts because you don't know whether they're predicting what the team will do or suggesting what the team will do. But if Tre'Davious White, the cornerback from LSU, is there, or heaven forbid Mike Williams, who I think is the best receiver in this draft from Clemson, I don't understand how you pass on him even if Reuben Foster, the linebacker from Alabama, is still there. Why are you going to draft a 230-pound linebacker who gets hurt a lot and had to lose weight in order to make himself a first-round pick? That's not exactly a recipe for success in the NFL. All my best to Reuben Foster, but they have gaping holes at 2 positions still, and they've addressed those positions to a degree, the Eagles have, with guys like Torrey Smith and Alshon Jeffrey, but only in the short term. And I'm not sure that they can pretend that, Patrick Robinson is the answer at cornerback. That to me just seems very short-sighted.
Marcus, I have contended for a while now that, in my opinion, I think the Eagles, they need to address cornerback, especially the first round, because you're going in the division against guys like Brandon Marshall, Odell Beckham Jr., Des Bryant, and now Terrell Pryor. And I'm sorry, I don't have a ton of confidence in Patrick Robinson and Ron Brooks across from Jalen Mills to get the job done. What do you think the Eagles need to do when it comes to cornerback? Do you think they should address it in the first couple rounds? Do you think they need to have a balanced approach with it? Do you think they need to go the concept of flooding? What do you think they need to do to address a cornerback position that, by all intents and purposes, is very thin?
Yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't mind them taking, if they're interested in really building that position, taking 2 picks in the first 3 rounds, if there are players there that they're interested in. It's the sort of position I don't think you can have too many. Well, somebody gets hurt every year at cornerback on every team, and you're lucky if your 4th cornerback, or you're very well prepared, like the New England Patriots were. You're very well prepared if your 4th cornerback can be a starter, not a star, not a Pro Bowler, but a starter. And it's a position where you need a lot of depth. You need at least 4, if not 5 guys with the capacity to start and play on special teams. I'm not sure they have one, So, yeah, I have no problem with them overdrafting that position, the way they did. I think it was 2002 with Lito Shepherd and
Sheldon Brown.
Sheldon Brown. Yeah, I mean, and they took a lot of heat for that. I believe Bobby Taylor was still on the team at that point, and maybe Troy Vincent as well. So yeah, I mean, you draft. The NFL has been for a long time legislated to make these positions important. Number one, quarterback, obviously, but then number two, the people who protect the quarterback, the left and right tackles, left tackle more so than anything else, then the people who sack the quarterback, the defensive ends. That's why they make so much money and, get so much hype. But then receivers and cornerbacks, maybe not in that order. Maybe cornerbacks, then receivers, because as a receiver, the rules are on your side. As a cornerback, you might have to be a more polished player quicker to have an effect. So, yeah, I mean, the edges and the quarterback are what matter. And you can't have enough people at the edges of quarterback. Nobody goes from guard to tackle. Tackles become guards, So, yeah, cornerbacks become safety. Safeties don't usually become corners. So that's where the talent is, and that's where I think you need to sort of be in order to have long-term success.
He's Marcus Hayes. I highly recommend you read his article. You can go check it out at Philly.com about Bryan Colangelo, the Sixers GM. I really appreciate you taking the time today and your insights.
My pleasure. Thanks, Josh.